Okay, here we go. Last one. Or a last one for 2021 stupid internal test. We made it. Thank you for sticking with me. If you've watched all these bloody things. Here we go. So the last one is back to kind of internal solutions. It's things that you can do, yourself, in principle. And what we said all the way through is that unless the government is good, nothing's going to work. So poor governance makes all of the obstacles worse. Poor governance means that most solutions aren't really going to work. When we looked at things like aid, it's only going to work if you've got a good government, and if you've got a good government, you probably don't need aid. Things like EPI and ISI, they only really work effectively if you have a strong, committed government that's going to implement the policy effectively. So, what can we do about kind of corruption and poor governance? Yeah. So, really, it's extraordinarily difficult. But because once corruption is present, then it's often the people who are corrupt that are ones that are going to try and get rid of it. So often you need kind of major changes in administration to bring something about. But when we've looked at anti-corruption strategies across the world, we've seen certain themes that tend to mean that anti-corruption can be more effective. And the things that tend to work are, firstly, if you can increase transparency. That would be my number one starting point. Hence the name of the big anti-corruption organisation, Transparency International. Because what transparency can do is, if everybody can see what's going on, it means that as an individual, that if you're considering being corrupt, you've got more chance of being caught. So when Georgia reformed the police, for example, they all had to wear body cameras and so on. So we know these can be turned off and so on, but it increases the chance that somebody's going to see what you're doing. It increases awareness of the issue. So also in Georgia, they kind of reformed all the places that you went to get your public documents, like passports. They became open plan. Everybody could see what was going on. The opportunity is, it's just obvious what's going on. We saw that in Botswana. Transparency was, so Botswana obviously is a big diamond producer, and normally that comes with the resource curse. But in the case of Botswana, it was obvious from the way they structured government that ordinary individuals were involved in Botswanan democracy, that the Botswanan government was pretty transparent about what money it was generating from diamonds and where that money was being spent. So it was this idea of kind of wider democracy in that sense. In Kenya, as part of court reforms, they published court rulings digitally, so people could see that things were happening, that people were being prosecuted. So that's one thing that you can do. I'm not saying that any of this is easy, but that's something that can be done. A second thing that you've got to do is to try to decrease the incentives for corruption. So often the reason that people are corrupt is that you have no choice. Your salary is so low that the only way in which you can live is to be corrupt. So in the Rose Revolution in Georgia, which we talked about, which was about 15 years ago, one of the things that they did is they increased the salaries of civil servants, not by 15%, but by 15 times. So for every dollar that you were originally being paid, you're now being paid $15. And that creates major, it means that A, you want to keep your job, and B, there's just less need to be corrupt. And that's quite important. At the same time, you can reduce incentives by changing the consequences of being caught. So an interesting one again was in Kenya, where one of the reforms that they made was to help civil servants and public officials with subsidised mortgages on their properties. So while you work for the government, you got a really, really low interest loan to buy a house. If you lose that job, then all of a sudden you lose that loan, you lose your house. Your family aren't going to be very happy. Quite clever. So there are things that we can do in terms of making corruption less attractive. But apart from making it less attractive, what we can do is we can decrease the opportunity to be corrupt as well. So we just make it harder to be so. So, for example, cuts in bureaucracy. Yeah, if there are fewer stages in a process to gain a document, there are fewer chances for somebody to demand a bribe. And part of that can be things like, and that can be simplified by things like digitization. Yeah, so when we looked again at Georgia, one of the big changes they made, in addition to having these public service halls, the whole process was also digitized, so that you never handed over cash to officials. A lot of documents you just uploaded yourself. So again, it just makes it, more difficult. Yeah, the fewer stages there are, the more difficult it is to be corrupt. And finally, probably the most important thing, or not necessarily the most important thing, but an important thing, is to establish credibility. It's, if you're going to do this, people have to believe that you're serious. Otherwise, it isn't going to work. So, again, in Georgia, one of the first things they did was to prosecute senior office holders. From all political parties. And they prosecuted about 1,000 of them in the first 7 years. Again, trying to show that a difference is being made. In Indonesia, they have an anti-corruption authority, but it's made independent of the government. It has its own budget. It has its own ability to recruit. It has the authority to go after senior politicians if it needs to do so. But, we can see what needs to be done, but in reality, it's very difficult because, as we said before, the people who are making the changes are often people who themselves have benefited from corruption in the past. So you look at the countries where differences appear to have been made, often there have been major changes. In the case of Kenya, there was an entirely new constitution before this came about. In the case of Georgia, there was a violent overthrow of the existing government, that led to sweeping changes. Ukraine, which is the current kind of country that appears to be trying anti-corruption. Again, it was a political outsider, somebody who wasn't part of the establishment who became president. And it's just difficult to know what works as well because it's so difficult by definition to measure corruption. It's like if you can see it, somebody's doing it very badly. So it's the number one solution, but it's also probably the single most difficult thing to bring about because it requires a fundamental change in culture and procedures and processes and everything. But anyway, there we go.